Hello, everyone. From the Complutense University of Madrid. My name is Concha Gil, and I am professor of microbiology and director of the proteomics core facility of my university. I will be the moderator of this interesting webinar about the self-determination theory. It is a pleasure for me to introduce the speaker, Dr. Juan Luis Fuentes. He is Associate Professor of the Department of the Education Studies of the Faculty of Education and also Associated Dean of the same faculty. He's going to give us a very interesting lecture about the self-determination theory. He will discuss the relevance of the intrinsic motivation compared to the extrinsic motivation, as well as the fundamental elements that concern autonomy, competence, and relatedness. He will also address the process that allows us to move towards an internalization of motivation and what strategies we can use to place it at the center of our professional experience. Finally, he will analyze 1 to 2 case studies. We hope this information will be very useful for you. And as Irena said, to participate, you can ask or answer questions through the chat, or you can also raise your hand. Juan Luis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Concha, and thank you, Irena, and thank you also all of you for coming with us today to be in this seminar. And also congratulations to the organization of this RItrain project, because I think that this is one of the things that we used to miss when we are working in our daily activities, and sometimes we don't have time to think about something that is important to do the work that we do. Maybe it is not related with the content, but it's related with the as the word said, motivation. And one of the questions that you can ask yourselves is what someone from the Faculty of Education can tell me about my work, about the things that we do in research. Well, when I was proposed to prepare this session, this webinar, I was thinking about the possibilities to say something that could be related with different files of knowledge and how is that related with research, with research groups. And I decided to dedicate this time to introduce a theory, to introduce a proposal that has made at least 2 or 3 contributions during the last decades that we can apply in different contexts. This is the self-determination theory, and more concretely, I will focus on this idea of motivation. Motivation, if you just take a look on the origin or the roots of this word, is related with another word, with the word motion. And motion is something that takes us to do something. We don't do something in our lives if we don't have a reason to do this kind of activities. So motivation is that reason, is that impulse, is that force that help us or that guide us to do something, whatever we are talking about, and in different contexts. Actually, although I'm going to focus in a professional context, we can even discuss this, and I hope that you intervene, that you can reflect on the questions that I'm going to make you here, because this is not only related with a professional context, but also with personal decisions. Actually, it is quite difficult to distinguish between a professional sphere and a personal sphere. We can say, of course, we need to distinguish these 2 spheres because we have different roles in different contexts. But when we are working and when we decide where I want to work, to what kind of activities I want to dedicate my life, or which is my role in a specific team, it is related with the kind of person that I am, or with the motivations that I have to do something. That's why I'm going to dedicate this session to the professional sphere, of course. It cannot be otherwise, but it is difficult, as I said, to just focus in the professional sphere. And I would like to provoke some reflections on you. If you want to share that reflection with me, that will, and with the rest of the people, that will be fine. But not only for today. Of course, it is impossible to say everything we can say about self-determination theory in just 1 hour, in just one seminar. But the important thing of this is to promote reflections not only for today, but for your work, for your daily activities and professional activities. So I would like to, first of all, just to say a little bit about how I'm going to structure this presentation. First of all, let me just to introduce a little bit the topic and contextualize what are we talking about. And then I will define, which is this self-determination theory, which are the origins of this, how we are talking about self-determination theory. I'm going to give you some ideas just in case you want to go deeper on this theory. And then I will focus on the two main ideas that I think that we can learn from this self-determination theory. On the one hand, this distinction between extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. This is going to be very useful for us to decide and to reflect and to choose which are the motivations that we have when we are working in our professional sphere. And the second contribution is related with something that is controversial, of course, but is a kind of milestone in history of philosophy and history of psychology. And of course, it could be applied to different contexts in which these authors identify three common necessities that all human beings have. As I said, this is controversial because how can we identify something for everybody? Well, I will come back to this later. And then I have also prepared two case studies. One of them is a predefined case adapted to a specific research context in which I would like to share with you some ideas and try to apply this self-determination theory. And then I will make a few questions about your specific context in which you are working and how you think that could apply these ideas on motivation and on common necessities, and with practical tips that we can use in our research activities. Of course, I will give you some references just in case you want to go deeper on that. And my email, because this is something in which I am working, is part of my daily activity. So I will be happy to answer questions that are not arising today, but that maybe in the future you have. Well, Concha has said something about me, just to make a small introduction. I am associate professor at the Faculty of Education, as Concha said, and I am at the same time working in this Deanship of International Relationship. One of my lines of research is also this topic that you can see here. This is a national project in which we are collaborating with 10 universities here in Spain, but also in the UK and in Latin America, in which we are focusing on the idea of the contemporary university and the democracy. In other words, which is the role of universities in the current democracies, especially based on the idea of free speeches and political polarization. I've been working also with families, children, and teenagers in Madrid, in people in social risk, especially in social services. And what I teach is related with self-determination theory, but apply it to the schools or applied to teacher training, primary teacher training to be more concrete. I teach theory and philosophy education, which is the origin of this seminar today. Well, let me start by asking you a few questions. You don't have to answer that, at least not in the chat, or you don't have to speak. If you want to do it, you are free to do that, but just to provoke a kind of reflections. The first one is, what makes me do things? Do we act just because I have to act? Or there is a kind of reflection on the things that I do in my life? Not only in my professional life, also in my personal life, but specifically, which is the reason of the things that I do in my professional life, in my research department, in my research group, my research center, etc. Another question related with that is why I do what I do. Is that a question that I usually ask myself, or just I am following orders? There is something of myself in the things that I decide to do, or which is the reason of my actions. Can I see something behind my decisions that I can identify, that I can define, or that I can see myself as a mirror in which I see the kind of person or the kind of professional that I am? Let me just propose you another deeper question. Do I have a purpose? A purpose is not something that I decide just for today. It's not short time. It's something more looking to the future. Do I have an idea of the kind of professional that I want to be? Do I have defined this profile of researcher, of administrator, or whatever? And the last question has a different nature. If I am working with a group of people, what can I do to motivate others in a professional context? What can I do to move my group in a specific direction? How can I solve problems with my group when they don't want to do the things that we have to do? As you can see, they are professional questions, but they are related with the personal sphere. And we can give different answers to these kind of questions. So what we are going to do is to, because they are not easy questions, as you can guess, but what can we learn from this self-determination theory to provide an answer to this important question for us? Well, let me just say something about the origin, the context in which we can identify this self-determination theory. First of all, I put here 3 pictures. The first one is Nancy Snow. She is a philosopher in which we can find some of the origin of this proposal, of this reflection, of this theory on motivation. She published an article that has a quite challenging title. The title is "Maybe We Are Living Interesting Times." Why? Why this curious title that she is proposing us? Well, in this title and in the article that she wrote, she focuses on something that is happening during the last 2 or 3 decades, but it's something quite new, it's something complex. And she's talking about the encounter between 2 disciplines that before that they had different ways, different paths. They were following different directions. And even when they were talking about the same or about similar things, they had not the opportunity to put together the ideas and to pursue the same aims. I'm talking about philosophy and I'm talking about psychology. Philosophy is the study of things, the deep study of things, and psychology is the study of human beings, or more concretely, the study of the minds of human beings. This encounter between these two disciplines help us. It's difficult because at least one reason. The first one is that philosophy tries to study universal concepts or objective concepts on life. Meanwhile, psychology, not all the authors or all the trends or all the models, but an important part of psychology has focused on the subjective well-being of human beings. How can I help, as a psychologist, people to live a better life? But, and this is the difference between psychology and philosophy in a way, not completely, but in a way, that meanwhile psychology focused in this subjective well-being, philosophy prefer to speak about objective ideas of the good life. Okay? But with authors, as Nancy Snow, we are going to the same aim. We are following or we are trying to combine the ideas of psychology and the ideas of philosophy, trying to find common answers to these big questions that I just made in the previous slide. So in this context, we find theories like the self-determination theory that it has been applied not in a specific context, not in a specific discipline, as I said, but in many different files of knowledge and professional contexts, as education, psychotherapy, healthcare, work organization, parenting, sport, business, etc. Actually, if you just take a look on publications about this issue, you will find many publications in different kind of journals, different disciplines or knowledge, etc. The second pillar, the second phenomenon that we can identify to find the origin of this self-determination theory could be in this positive psychology. I don't know if you're familiar with this positive psychology, but there is a movement, there is a change on the perspective of psychology during the 70s, the 80s, and more concretely during the 90s, in which psychology tried to change the focus. And as I put here, for this group of psychologists, they started to be worried about the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. This is important because meanwhile, during the origins or during the history of psychology, they were talking about how to solve problems, how to solve mental problems, how to solve psychopathologies. Now, they think that it's important, not only that, this is today important, of course, but at the same time, psychologists or psychology in general should give people ideas, key thoughts about how to live better lives. Okay, so we can summarize this in this last point. They are worried about building the good in life instead of repairing the bad. We can say not only repairing the bad, but at the same time, building the good in life. These two guys that you can see here are the main authors in this self-determination theory. On the one hand is Defi, and on the other hand is Ryan. They are the main authors. They have many publications on that. But as we can imagine, these theories doesn't emerge from nothing. Two important authors that will help us to understand what we're talking about when we refer to the self-determination theory is, in this context of positive psychology, the contributions by Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman who is here, was the president of the American Psychological Association, and together with Christopher Peterson wrote this book, Character, Strengths and Virtues, in which they are worried about what can identify in the human character in order to be happy, or what kind of skills, what kind of virtues, what kind of character strengths we should promote in ourselves and in the people we are working with, we are educating, in order to provoke a better life. There is a change between something that we identify in psychology previously with this image of the dog that you can see here. If you know a little bit about psychology, if you don't know, don't worry about that, because it is quite simple. Conductism explains the reality, saying that when we make decisions based on what make me feel right, or what make me feel pain, or what make me feel something wrong, according to good or bad experiences, according to good or bad stimuli. So here there is a dog that is moving to the other part of the box because he's feeling this cruel shock in his body. So this is the motivation that move us when we make decision. I stay here because I am fine, but if I feel something bad, I move myself to other place where I think that it will be better. This is useful, for example, in kindergarten with little kids, because they need to know which are the rules, which are the good things and the bad things. But when we are growing up, we need another kind of motivations. We need another kind of we reflect on the reality, and our mind become more complex. And this scheme, this conductism, is not enough to explain the human behavior and the human motivation. We cannot reduce, we cannot limit the motivation, our motivation, to this small conception of the reality. I just would like to give you this. This is a small video. I'm not going to show you this here because we don't have too much time. But I would like to share this this explanation of what is positive psychology with you. And as you can access to this presentation, you can watch it later. Let me just say something more about this. What can we see here? What do you have in this screen? You have to this author with this difficult name, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, if I pronounce well his name, and this interesting book, Creativity, the Psychology of Discovery and Invention. It is not just a book of psychology, it's a book that we can use in different contexts. But I put this image here. Why? Why? What is this? This is a prison. How is a prison related with these ideas of creativity? And how is this prison, how is a prison, how could be a prison related with motivation? Well, for this author, creativity, the capacity to create something new, something original, something that is related with myself, with the kind of person that I am, is related also with exterior circumstances. Circumstances that we can find many different circumstances, but mainly we can define two: the space and the time. I cannot do the same kind of things when I am in a specific space and when I am in another space. And we cannot do the same kind of things when I have 1 hour and when I have a year. What do I have in a prison? What I have is time. We have a lot of time. Actually, time is endless in a prison. According to this author, he made a very important study in the States with many people. He made interviews and he found that the best conditions that we can have to develop our creativity is when we do not pay attention to time, or when time is not something that has an important limitation. We can say, well, time is always limiting us because we live in time. We cannot avoid time. Yeah, but we can stop thinking about time. When we focus on the activity that we are doing and time is not important for us, is when we can develop all our potential and all our creativity. This is related with something that we are going to say later. Let me just continue a little bit about another theory that could support, that is one of the bases of the self-determination theory. Maybe you know this pyramid. This is the pyramid, very well known, promoted by Abraham Maslow. He was a humanistic psychologist. And he spoke about different levels of satisfaction of human beings. What are we looking for in our lives? He identified this pyramid. For me, it's a controversial pyramid, and it is not adapted to every situation. But I found interesting for the self-determination theory because, as you can see here, at the bottom of the pyramid, in the lower levels, we can find physiological necessities. Then we see safety necessities, belonging and love. Can you see how they are different necessities? The first one are more primary necessities, but then we are going to other kind of necessities in which I'm not focusing just on the things that we need to survive. But, and this is the qualitative step, when we identify something that is important for not only for survive, but at the same time to live good lives. This is important part of that. And this is why this is related with positive psychology. And but it's also related on could be the base of the three common necessities that we are going to focus later in this self-determination. Okay? Well, let me go to the third point and to the first contribution of the self-determination theory. As I said, there are two important contributions of this theory that we can apply in our research context. The first one is the distinction and the analysis that these authors made on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Actually, the name is quite interesting here. It's meaningful. You can see that this extrinsic, I think that just the name is telling us a lot of things. Extrinsic come from outside, not from the individual, but from something that is happening in other places or in other person even. So, but they also call this extrinsic motivation as controlled motivation. So the question could be controlled by whom? Who is controlling this motivation? Well, we can say that this is controlled by someone that is not me. It is not an intrinsic motivation. It is something that comes from the outside, we can say. The definition that these authors give us is this extrinsic or control motivation requires an instrumentality between the activity and some separable consequences, such as tangible or verbal rewards. So, and this is important part, satisfaction comes not from the activity itself, but rather from the extrinsic consequences to which the activity leads. That could be positive or negative. Let me compare this with the other conception of motivation, the intrinsic or autonomous motivation. Can you see here the difference between control motivation or autonomous motivation? So autonomous or intrinsic motivation, according to them, involves people doing an activity, and this is the important part, because they find it interesting and derive spontaneous satisfaction from the activity itself. The focus changed in the first and in the second one. Which is the origin of this satisfaction? What is the origin of this thing that we feel interesting for us? In the extrinsic or control motivation comes from the outside, come from something that we cannot control. It's controlled, but not by me. And on the other hand, this autonomous motivation defines satisfaction in the activity itself, not in other kind of things, in the activity that I am deciding to do this specific activity. So, in other words, just to give you more ideas about this distinction, that is the axis is the key idea of this theory. Intrinsic motivation is doing something for its own sake. Here, I would like to distinguish between two concepts that we don't have in our common language, but when we go to the classic Greek, they had two different words that are very illustrating for us. On the one hand, they had this word poiesis that means production. Production in a technical sense. When I am producing something that have a result. For example, when I produce, I don't know, I produce this. This is the result of my production. And this is the important part. If I do not produce this object, the process of production doesn't make sense. Okay? This is the word poiesis. On the other hand, we can identify the word praxis. Praxis is when I am producing something, but this is not the only important thing. There is something in this process that has a value itself that could be useful. If it is not useful, the process has failed. But if I am learning something in the process of producing this, there is an added value to the kind of things that I do. So we can distinguish between these two things. Let me give you another two words that will help us to understand this better. The word price and the word value. Everything can have a price. That could be 2 euros, 3 euros, I don't know. But which is the value of this? That could be a values thing. It helps me to do something that is important for me. If I have to fix something in my office, if I don't have this, the value of the activity is more important than the price that I have, that I give to this. But let me give you another example. This have a price, but a person has a value. We cannot give a price to a person, because if we define a price for a person, we are considering the person not as an end, but as a mean, as an instrumental that I have to use to get something, but not because of the person, but just because of the thing that I want to get. Okay? The Greeks told us that if we are just following, and this is also the contribution of the self-determination theory, instrumental things, if we are just pursuing, if we are just following, if we just move ourselves based on extrinsic or control motivation, we will be in what they call the endless chain of utilitarianism, in which I am just following an end, but this end is not enough for me, and I am not doing this because of the activity itself, but because I am following another activity. And when I am in this process, that could be endless. That's why we can call it the endless chain, in which I'm not pursuing something because it has value itself, but because it's useful for something else, for another activity or for another object. For Aristotle, this is the best way of unhappiness. And that's why we need to define and we need to find another kind of motivation. Let me ask you a few ideas, and you can ask this question if you wish. You can use the chat or you can use your own voice. Have you ever had this feeling of continuous insatisfactions in the things that you do? Or could you give an example of this extrinsic motivation in which you are always following something that you cannot control? You have choose to do that, but there is not something with value in the same activity. Or on the other hand, do you have any example of this intrinsic motivation as we have defined this? What could you say about that? Would you like to share some examples, some ideas, some reflections? They are not easy questions. Maybe you need more time to reflect on that. But the important thing here, guys, is not to know what is intrinsic motivation or what is extrinsic motivation, but to identify this in our lives, in our research context, in our professional context. This is important part. How can we find this from theory to practice? How can I translate this? That many researchers on this theory is analyzing from a theoretical point of view, but also from a practical point of view. Something that we can say is that there are many, a lot of research based on this theory in many different countries, many different cultures, and many different disciplines, not only psychology, philosophy, education, etc. Okay, thank you, Rena. You can think about that. Actually, I'm going to put an example, the case study later. So you don't have an answer now, and you don't feel comfortable with the description that we have given. You can answer later, okay? Don't worry about that. Let me give you a few more ideas about this that maybe will help you to complete this definition of what are we talking about when we refer to human extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. Well, how these authors found these ideas? Well, they, especially Deci, made an important question. Pay attention, in 1971, so this is not something new. I mean, that started more than 50 years ago. Yeah. So he made this question: do external rewards increase motivation of persons when they are engaged in significant activities? This is the key question. We cannot just say, okay, the important thing is autonomous or internal intrinsic motivation. If we do not prove, if we do not demonstrate that this is working, and that this is working in different contexts, in different cultures, etc. What do they did at the beginning? They support this research in many other studies. But at the beginning, they had a group of students, two groups of students, in which they proposed this puzzle that you can see here, this simple thing. And they had to solve this puzzle. And to the first group, to the group A, they gave a monetary reward when they complete the puzzle. And on the contrary, they didn't give this monetary reward to the group B. So they both solved this puzzle, but the response that was given by the researchers was not the same. What did they find? They found that intrinsic motivation, what was in the second group, in the group B, disappears when the rewards, the external rewards appear. So we substitute one by the other. And this is very, very important. This is a relevant thing. Mariana is saying here, intrinsic motivation will be doing something at work that aligns with my values, working for the climate, and extrinsic could be getting a good salary. Okay, I think this is fine. It's a good definition of both kinds of motivation. For these authors, in that case, we prefer or we should promote the first one than the second one. And for them, the problem is not only that one is better than the other, but the problem is what I just said here, that if my motivation or if my main motivation is just getting a good salary, the other is going to disappear. Okay, according to this theory. We can say, well, but getting a good salary is not a bad thing. It is necessary to live. Yeah, okay, that's true. I cannot say other thing about that. But even when good salary is something necessary, something that we need to live, the question that, for example, Abraham Maslow could make us is, what do we need? What do we need not only to live, but at the same time to live well? And that could be the idea of intrinsic motivation. Irena is saying intrinsic could be contributing to development by answering to the survey. For example, I want to contribute to researchers. I want to do something that is itself good. And motivation will be higher if you pay respondents, but the amount is always under discussion. Yeah, this is a good point. It's also related with this monetary reward that we are talking about based on the studies by Defi and Ryan. Since you go, hello, will we? Yeah. We are recording the session. Don't worry about that. Well, what kind of external rewards we can identify? There are many of them. It's not only monetary reward. For example, every kind of tangible rewards or deadlines. Why I am doing this? Because I have to do this because this is good, or because I have to do this before tomorrow because tomorrow is the deadline of this. This is an external limit, an external limitation of my, or an external motivation of my actions today. Or surveillance and evaluations, external evaluation. I am doing this because my boss is watching me or is going to ask me which are the results of my research, etc., etc. The problem is that this external or only external motivation tend to diminish feelings of autonomy and change what psychologists call the locus of causality. The locus of causality is to what we attribute or in what kind of reasons, what kind of causes I consider that is provoking my actions. For example, if I believe in astrology, if I think that planets and the stars are conditioning my actions, I will have a lower level of causality, or because I will interpret that my actions are not result of my decisions, but they are a consequence of something external to me. This is an extreme situation, of course. But when I lose this field of causality, locus of causality, or when we can call it even responsibility, when I don't feel the responsibility of my actions, the level of motivation is also going down. It's also decreasing. Okay. Let me go to the last part. Another consequence of this external abuse of external motivation could be this feeling that you can see in this image, when we feel ourselves like puppets, when we are controlled by someone that is moving me in different directions. It's moving my hands, it's moving my mind, it's moving my activities. And I don't feel well when I feel like a puppet, when I don't see myself in my own decisions. Okay? Let me continue a little bit. To the last part of, or to the last contribution of the self-determination theory. And this is a controversial part, as I told you before. For these authors, motivation is something quite important for human beings, especially intrinsic or autonomous motivation. But they also have a proposal, and it's controversial because they try to find common necessities in every single human being. Common necessities that derive from this objectivity that I told you at the beginning of this webinar, when we introduce not only subjective ideas of well-being that were based on psychology, but also philosophical ideas of the well-being that introduce an objective part. An objective is something that is not just defined by myself. I do not define just by myself what is good for me, but can I find something that is good for everybody? I'm not defining that this is good for me, but this is good for everybody because we are human beings, or because we have these shared or these common necessities. This is the key point, and this is also the controversial point that has been discussed. We don't have time to go deeper in this discussion, but this is the contribution, and I think that makes sense to interpret and to help us to promote this intrinsic motivation. So the question, if we prefer intrinsic motivation instead of extrinsic motivation, the question will be clear, will be, how do people feel intrinsically motivated? They identify 3 common necessities for everybody. The first one is the sense of volition and having the experience of choice, what we can describe as autonomy. When I am feeling that I make my choices, when I make my decisions, when I am not a puppet, as we said in the previous slide. The second one, we cannot confuse this autonomy with other similar words like independence, individualism, or detachment. Of course, they are a little bit related with autonomy, but autonomy doesn't imply that we should avoid others. The way we include others here, and we put this limit to the idea of autonomy, is with the third necessity, to which I will go later, okay? The second point is also important. The second necessity, the second common necessity for the self-determination theory is the competence. When we feel that we are mastering our environment, when we feel that we can change things, when we feel that we have impact on the things that we do, when we act and that has some consequences. Imagine when we are doing something that it doesn't make it change nothing. It has no consequences for my environment, for the persons I am working with, or even for myself. I will feel that I have nothing to do with the reality. And the last one is, as I said, the limitation to this autonomy is feeling related to others. We do not live alone. Aristotle said that we are political beings, that we are social beings, that we live with others. And these others, these links that we have with others, are helping us to live well, to have this good life. That's why we do not live alone in a mountain without interaction with others. That's why we prefer to live in groups, in families with friends, in a city, in a community, wherever. But others are also important for us. Okay. Don't worry, Dalila, thank you for coming. Now, let's go to the practical part. So how can we promote in ourselves or in others this process of internationalization? Or in other words, what can we learn from these three common necessities to promote this promotion of internalization, okay? In which motivation is not external, but is internal, is intrinsic, okay? So let me go to this definition by the authors. Internalization is people taking in values, attitudes, or regulatory structures such as the external regulation of a behavior is transformed into an internal regulation and thus no longer requires the presence of an internal contingency. When we identify an internal or intrinsic motivation, and we do not need an external motivation to do the things that we do. In other words, when we can do something only because of this internal motivation, and when we have changed this process, when we have moved from external or control motivation to intrinsic or autonomous motivation. It doesn't mean that the external motivation should disappear completely. A very good example is what you said before, the salary. I can enjoy my job and do not prescinde of my salary because I need the salary to live. I need money to pay my my debts, to pay everything I have to pay the bills, in other words. So, which is this process in which we prioritize the intrinsic motivation? I'm not going to say too much about this, just to give you a few ideas. For these authors, we should follow these three steps, general steps. The first one is what they define as introjected regulation. I take the regulation, so I accept this external regulation, this external motivation to do the things, but I do not accept it as my own. I don't see myself in this regulation. I recognize that this is a motivation, and this is a motivation for me. This is an effective motivation, but I don't see it as part of me. I give you an example. I work because it makes me feel a worthy person, but not because the work that I do is something that has value itself. The value is in a consequence of the things that I do, but not in the things that I do. Okay? I hope that you see the difference. This is the first part. This is the first step in which we can change the external for the internal or intrinsic motivation. Second step, identified regulation. I see or I identify the regulation as something that can help me to get my goals, but I don't see the intrinsic value of means. Let me give you an example. I can use unpleasant methods with my patients, for example, if I am a doctor, because they are good for them and I value their well-being. But if I have another treatment, I will prefer to use this alternative treatment. I don't see that this is the best. It's the best that I have, but it is not the best that I will use in case I will have another one. Okay? And finally, this is the integrated regulation in which my behavior is an integral part of who I am. I do not only recognize the importance of something. I do not see the possibility to change something that could be better for my actions. But in that case, and only in that case, is when I see myself, when I see a mirror in the things that I do, in the actions, in the means that I use, and I recognize them as part of what I am. I see myself in my actions. My actions describe me. And then is when I feel I am closest to this intrinsic or autonomous motivation. Okay, let me continue a little bit. I'm going to the end. This is a more complex scheme, a more complex and more detailed map of the explanation of the self-determination theory. We don't have time to go to every single idea that we can find here. It's just to give you a more panoramic view of that. On the one hand, we have the motivation. We don't have any kind of motivation. There is absence of internal regulation, and that produces a lack of motivation. I do not do things, for example, that could be derived from any kind of depressions, especially external minor depressions in psychology, and could be even the origin of more complex psychopathologies, no? Or even that could provoke that I change my job, that I move to other company, that I don't feel well in the place where I'm working. But then I can identify this external regulation, this is external motivation, and then that start to change with the 3 steps that I told you in the previous slide. And then we will arrive to the last step, the last point in which we fully recognize this intrinsic motivation, in which interest and enjoyment are part of the task. I do the things not because I am receiving something apart from the activity, a part of the proper activity. Let me give you another example. Why do I play games? Or why do I dance if I like to dance? Or why do I sing? I can sing because I am a professional singer and I receive money when I sing. That could be a possibility. But I can sing when I am at home, alone, when I am walking in the streets, because I like to sing, but not because I am receiving something. The difference between one and the other are related with this intrinsic motivation. And it is quite important to feel better and to be closest to this idea of happiness. Okay. What kind of practical activities, and pay attention to this because the last case is going to be related with that. What can we do as professionals, as responsible of a group of people, as the boss, as coordinator, or whatever? What can I do to promote this process of internalization in my colleagues or in myself? How can I get that my colleagues have or experiment this intrinsic or autonomous motivation? Well, the answer that we can find in this self-determination theory is related with these 3 common necessities. On the one hand, autonomy, the second one, competence, and the last one, relatedness. For them, autonomy, in that sense, is related with the possibility to make choice. If I give to the people I am working with the possibility to decide about at least a little bit, maybe we cannot give them the responsibility to decide or about everything or to make the big decisions or the final decisions. But if we give them at least a small possibility to say something, to participate on decision, that will provoke this feeling of autonomy. that will satisfy these first common necessities that are in all human beings. Related to that is creative expression. We have been talking about creativity without these external conditionants, no? These external conditions. But when I make decisions, I put something of myself on that. When I have the possibility to do things in different ways, I express myself and I see that I am here for something that I do, and not because someone should be here. I am not just a number. I am a person with an identity, and creativity is related with originality. Every human being is an original person. That's why we cannot use human beings. I should give them the possibility to pursue their own goals, and their own goals are not the same goals for everybody. Okay, so let me give you an example. Why in concentration camps prisoners have a number here? They don't have a name. They have a number here. A number is not the same than a name. A number is just one more, but it is not. It don't have something specific, something original. They didn't have her. Her is also something that is giving us a kind of identity. I can change my hair. I see myself differently when I cut my hair, when I have different colors of hair. We are different people because of my external, also my internal, but in this case, my external image that I show to others. I configure myself with the actions that I do. If I just reduce my actions to technical actions in which I cannot give something of myself, I don't have this feeling of autonomy. The same can be applied to cognitive flexibility. How do I solve the problems? How do I things that I have to do? What can I contribute to the problems that we have as a group or that I have as an individual? No? Cognitive flexibility and problem solving. Second point, competence. Not only when I can participate, but when I see that the things that I do have an impact in the reality. And to do that, as a coordinator of our research group, as a group in general, we should provide the opportunity to graduate the level of difficulty. If I put too difficult, too hard activities to my students as a teacher or to my colleagues, to my to the people I'm working with, they will feel frustrated. If the activities are too easy, they will feel that we do not consider them competent people. So one of the tasks that we need to do when we are working with people is to ask them to identify the optimal level of difficulty. And at the same time, for ourselves, which are the activities that I should do? Which are the activities that make me feel a competent person? No. The second point related to competence is to make people feel responsible for their successful performance. So when I do something well, when I do something bad, this is my responsibility. I have to face, I have to deal with the consequences, the bad consequences of my actions. But at the same time, I should recognize the success of the people I am working with. I should celebrate, I should give the appropriate value to the merits of the people. And finally, to give them the possibility to participate in decisions. Let me give you an example of this. When I am working with future teachers, I give them the example of a classroom in which rules are not decided completely by the teacher. The teacher the classroom cannot be always be a democratic space. It is not a democracy because many rules should be decided by the teacher. But when I have the experience to give pupils, I'm not talking about university students, I'm talking about children. When I give them the opportunity to decide about the rules, they are very strict. But sometimes we have to modulate that. But when they have the opportunity to decide about the rules, and the rules are part of the community of the classroom, they follow the rules, they respect the rules, and they claim others to follow the rules. So if we can do this with children, we can do this also with adults. Of course, we cannot give them the opportunity to decide about everything, but to give a little bit of space to be part of that community if we want that they feel this competence. And finally, relatedness. How can we get this feeling of relatedness? Well, something that we have just said, a positive feedback. When I recognize good things, good behaviors, good results in other people, I am telling them not only that they have done something good, but at the same time, this is what we can call a kind of analogic communication, not only focus on the content, but at the same time on the relationship that I have with them, that I recognize the value of that and the effort that he or she has done related with this activity. So what I am telling him or her is that this is important for me. This is important for us as a team, as a group, or wherever. Second point, supportive interpersonal context. If we want to promote creativity, we need to do that in a safe emotional environment. We need to allow that people fail, the right to make mistakes. If every single mistake is considered as something very a very big mistake, something that we feel like impossible to allow in a specific group, we don't promote this space for relatedness. We know that all the human beings have the possibility to fail, to make mistakes in many different contexts. So it doesn't mean that mistakes should be the norm or should be something always permitted and always allowed in a group. But the way we face mistakes is also part of this promotion of relatedness. So here we need to find a balance between the aim of perfection, perfection exists, or the need to improve, constant improvement of our activities, and how to allow mistakes in our works. And that also contributes to good work climates. There are many publications on how to create a good, healthy work climate. I'm not going to focus on this because I would like to go to the last part, to the practical part, or to the case study. Well, let me propose this case study. That could be a real case in which we have a research team that is trying to solve the following situation. The team has the need to finish their research task and publish the result of their studies, although they do not have sufficient funding to be able to do so. They also have coordination difficulties among the members of the team with different roles and incompatible schedules and tasks. In addition, there is fatigue among the members of the team and lack of real stimulus among the more senior researchers and excessive stress among the younger researchers, who never see their positions in the team consolidated. Okay, so what do you see here? Do you see something familiar? or do you see something that is related with the internal or external motivation? And the final question could be, what can you do to solve or to face or to deal with this situation, with this problem that you can see here?